Hi, everybody. It's the team from Pandora Astrology here to talk about Pluto changing its direction, pivoting from retrograde to direct, and also the upcoming Mercury retrograde period that's happening at the end of the month. I'm Jamie. I'm here in Berkeley, California.
And I'm Julia Mijas, joining in from Mystic, Connecticut.
So Pluto is one of the slow-moving planets. It's the slowest moving planet that we use in astrology, which means that it travels forward along the zodiac super slowly, and then it turns retrograde and travels backward for several months every year. So here's a thought. If you have Pluto retrograde in your natal chart, don't worry about it because that's actually pretty normal. It's retrograde for about a third of the year normally. And that's not that unusual. But while it's retrograde in the sky, what do you do about it? Pluto's the planet of transformation, right? And when planets go retrograde, there's often this feeling of a deepening, a soul searching, a turning backward, a turning inward, a sense of retrospection. So when Pluto is retrograde, then we have a transformative process going on there, a retrospective, transformative process, which is probably going to involve letting go of things. Maybe things that you really didn't want to let go of. Pluto is the Lord of death and rebirth, after all. But the good news today is it's about to go direct. This is the Pluto page on PandoraAstrology.com. And it tells you a lot of how the Pluto cycle works and how to handle, various aspects of it, along with all of the degrees that Pluto is traveling along this year. So if you have anything in these degrees of Capricorn or the other three cardinal signs like Aries, Libra, and Cancer, then you're definitely having a Pluto transit this year, and you might be in the midst of a transformation, and it might even be a heavy one. Metamorphosis is not easy. Julia, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, Pluto, is it going direct or is it going retrograde? I've just slipped my mind.
It is turning direct. You know what? This diagram looks a little funny. I think this is supposed to say November 2nd of 2019. Or it is October, but it's supposed to say 2019. So November 2nd of 2019 is the day that Pluto is turning direct. It has been retrograde for the last couple of months.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, basically, if you're having any type of Pluto transit this year, any type of dates where it's pivoting, either going forward or direct, tend to be pretty crucial in terms of the whole theme of that transit. So, if it's Sun, then it might be some type of either crisis or revelation that you're having in terms of your identity and your sort of direction in life.
Yeah.
If it's the Moon, it could have to do with your home and family. So, look to your own particular chart, and if you do notice anything in those degrees, especially in the cardinal signs, that could be a very interesting date to keep track of in terms of what it does to relate to the whole.
Yeah, and these, I call them pivotal days for a reason. The day that Pluto turns retrograde, the day that it turns direct. And the interesting thing is that if you have something in between the degrees where it does that, you'll still feel it, even though that's not an exact hit for you. And so these days are often worth watching in the news because everybody who's having any kind of Pluto transit this year is going to feel those pivotal days. And sometimes stuff crops up in the news around them. Now, there's another event going on this month, which is that Mercury is going to be entering its shadow period towards the end of the month. And Julia, you asked me an interesting question earlier, which was, how do you know when Mercury's in its shadow period?
Right.
Well, the definition of it is that Mercury has started to slow down. Now, what does that mean, Mercury slowing down? How do you know when Mercury is slow? How do you know when it's fast? When Mercury is going slower than the sun goes in its usual daily motion, it is starting to slow down. Mercury ordinarily goes pretty fast, a little faster than the sun every day. So For example, I have here the ephemeris page, my beat up old ephemeris, which is how they get when you've been practicing astrology for a couple decades.
I remember that one.
Yeah, that you do. You've seen it in my office lots of times. So I'm looking at October of 2019. That says September. I'm in October. And I'm just kind of reading down the line. And early in the month of October, we have Mercury moving pretty fast. I see it says 26 degrees Libra, 28 degrees Libra, 29, 0 degrees Scorpio, 2 degrees Scorpio, 3 degrees Scorpio, 5 degrees Scorpio. So it's moving at a rate of maybe 1.5 degrees a day. And then later on in the month, it starts to slow down. And the sun really regularly moves just about 1 degree a day. It's fairly standard that way. So as the month progresses, we have Mercury coming on the 20th. It's at 20 degrees of Scorpio. The next day at 21 degrees, 22 degrees, 23, 24, 25. And then it's at 25 again the next day. It's only moved about 40 minutes, not a full degree. Then it's in 26, 26, 27, 27, 27. It really slows down. So right there on about the 24th of October is when we enter the shadow period. And that really is just about a week before Mercury turns retrograde proper. And that's quite normal. And it happens again on the other side when Mercury is direct, and it's going to turn direct in November. And that's going to happen on, oh, where the heck is it? Oh, it's around the 21st. Yep, it's the 20th. And Mercury will be in 11 degrees of Scorpio at the time, but it's really going to take a week before it speeds up and starts moving about 1 degree a day. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, and I'm so glad that we're talking about the shadows of the Mercury retrograde, because most people just only talk about the exact dates it turns.
Right, as if it was an on-off switch, which it isn't.
Exactly. It's not, like, transits aren't these, like, rigid bookends. You know, they work more like bell curves, if you remember those from high school. It's kind of like the apex of the bell curve is when the transit is most acutely felt, but there's some lead up. And then, you know, even after it turns direct, it's going to take a little while. You know, you were saying about a week for things, and it'll be day by day getting faster and faster.
Right.
So that's why it's important to even know planetary speed. As well as just like whether it is technically either retrograde or direct.
Right. There's the status, and then there's the, you know, the phasing. And more sensitive people will notice these things, will feel these things. You know, some people who are sensitive to Mercury, maybe if you're a Gemini or you have Mercury retrograde in your natal chart and you really feel that planet's movements. For you, it might be, you know, you might notice it when Mercury's in the shadow period.
Oh, yeah. And anybody who has a concentration of Scorpio, I mean, this Mercury is going to be conjoining those. It could potentially be conjoining some of those planets.
Yes. Yeah, Mercury, this time, Mercury is going to do its whole retrograde period in the sign of Scorpio. This is the Mercury retrograde page on Pandora Astrology. It has a lot of information about how Mercury retrograde works, how the whole cycle works. And how to handle various phases of the cycle. Quite specifically, this particular Mercury retrograde period in Scorpio begins when Mercury gets to 27 degrees and then backs up to 11 degrees. So, and this is sort of an example of a way that Mercury retrograde goes, which is that it usually spends several cycles in a row in the same element. And it's been traveling through water quite a bit in this this calendar year of 2019. And it's going to continue being mostly in water into 2020. And then it'll start to cycle into air signs. Yeah. So that means that these Mercury retrograde periods, which they have to do with, you know, really looking at yourself and checking yourself in the area of communication, because they fall in water signs, they're going to be emotional too. Right. And that's not always the case. Sometimes during Mercury retrograde, we get, you know, a little confused. We lose stuff. We, you know, we mess up a communication, or we're not very clear or articulate. But when it's in water, it's gonna involve feelings too.
And intuition too. Maybe reviewing your intuition or getting more in touch with it during a retrograde cycle.
Yeah, that can absolutely happen. Now, Scorpio, Julia, when you think of Scorpio, what sorts of conversations do you think that people might find themselves having during this cycle?
I think people will have it's there's a potential for conversations regarding intimacy. Scorpio is a very sort of deep feeling. It's got the urge to merge, like all the water signs do. So conversations around intimacy, conversations around shared resources and security, personal security. Those could be potential topics. Anything you'd add to the list, or?
When I think of Scorpio, I think that it has to do with the three forms of sharing, which is emotional, physical, and financial. And
Nice.
emotional means everybody has their own emotional bubble around them, right? And then when you sit down in conversation with another person, it's like two bubbles pop together, and then you've got this shared conversational space in which, maybe you get intimate. Maybe you really talk about something deep and heavy. Maybe you get vulnerable. And so that's the kind of thing that shows up during this. And then there's the physical sharing aspect of Scorpio, which is sexuality. So some of those conversations might involve, things to do with life in the bedroom or repercussions of life in the bedroom. And then there's financial. And so there could be quite a few conversations to do with, the finances that you share with your spouse, or your investments that you're making, or whether you've paid your taxes. So, yeah, and Mercury retrograde is I think because we can get so disorganized during Mercury retrograde and lose papers and stuff. It's always such a pain if Mercury retrograde happens during the lead up to tax time.
Oh yeah.
And this is the time of year actually when a lot of people might be paying their taxes late. October is, if you have gotten an extension, I think it's the final deadline if your fiscal year is lined up with the calendar year. So I would not delay. If I were watching this video right now, I would not delay, because not only, Scorpio have to do with taxes and those sorts of things, but it can get messy, It doesn't need to be a big old argument.
Yeah. And Scorpio is also it's the archetype of the detective too. So when I see Mercury in Scorpio, I think research, using your mind to dig deep into things.
Yeah.
And possibly a little bit of paranoid thinking as well. So it could be that if you have something to research, or you're digging around for answers, that you might hit a few stumbling blocks during that time as well.
Well, yeah, or you might discover something you didn't want to find. So don't read your boyfriend's phone. Or take responsibility for what you find if it's not pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. TMI, Scorpio is very good at TMI. Well, the Mercury retrograde cycle proper doesn't really kick off until November, so that's when we're going to see most of this activity. But, it's so nice to be ready before it even happens.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we have today. I do want to say that we're going to put out a video soon about the upcoming conjunction between Pluto and Saturn coming up in January of 2020. It's really going to be a doozy, and I feel like I want to do some little bit more historical research before we make that video, because it might be momentous, and I think it would be good to see it in a bigger context. So watch for that on our YouTube channel, in our news playlists at Pandora Astrology. And we'll see you around the cosmos. Bye.
Bye, guys.